The scorching Phoenix sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of East Van Buren Street, where 11-year-old Madison Parker wiped the sweat from her brow as she arranged her small collection of handmade jewelry on a weathered cardboard box. The makeshift display sat precariously on the sidewalk, catching the attention of occasional passers-by who rarely stopped to purchase anything. Madison's small fingers worked expertly, adjusting the position of each bracelet and necklace she had crafted from discarded wire and colorful beads she found in dumpsters behind craft stores. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the previous evening. The $10 she had earned yesterday had gone straight to Dolores Martinez, the stern woman who had taken her in after her mother's passing 6 months ago. Dolores ran a tight ship in the cramped apartment they shared with 3 other children, all of whom contributed to the household income through various street activities. Madison had quickly learned that questioning Dolores's methods was not an option. "You better bring back more than yesterday, girl," Dolores had warned that morning, her voice sharp with authority. "Rent's due next week, and I ain't covering for no lazy kids." Madison's dark eyes scanned the street hopefully as she repositioned a particularly intricate bracelet made from blue and silver wire. The piece was her favorite creation, inspired by memories of her mother's gentle hands, teaching her to twist metal into beautiful patterns. Her mother, Sarah, had been a talented artist before illness consumed her strength, leaving Madison with only fragments of memories and the skills she had passed down. The heat shimmered off the pavement as Madison counted the coins in her small pouch. $3.50, not nearly enough to satisfy Dolores's expectations. She took a deep breath and began calling out to pedestrians, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and desperation. Beautiful handmade jewelry, only $5 each, perfect gifts. Most people walked past without acknowledgement, lost in their own worlds of air-conditioned cars and comfortable lives. Madison had grown accustomed to being invisible, just another face in the forgotten corners of Phoenix, where poverty painted the landscape in muted colors and broken dreams. The rumble of a powerful engine caught her attention, and Madison looked up to see a sleek black Mercedes-Benz pulling up to the curb nearby. The car's polished surface reflected the harsh sunlight like a mirror, and Madison couldn't help but stare at its pristine condition. She had never seen such a beautiful vehicle up close, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to ride in something so luxurious. The engine suddenly sputtered and died, followed by a series of mechanical clicking sounds that Madison recognized immediately. Her mother had taught her about engines during their brief time together, showing her how to identify problems by listening to the sounds they made. This particular combination of noises indicated a loose battery connection, something that could be fixed quickly with the right tools. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, his face twisted with frustration. Alexander Westbrook ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair as he pulled out his phone, clearly preparing to call for assistance. At 45, he had built an empire in real estate development, but mechanical problems were not within his expertise. Madison watched as he paced beside the vehicle, speaking rapidly into his phone. She could hear fragments of his conversation about important meetings and time-sensitive deals. Something about his demeanor suggested that this delay was more than just an inconvenience. It was potentially costly. "Excuse me, sir," Madison called out, her voice small but determined. "I think I know what's wrong with your car." Alexander paused mid-sentence and looked at her with barely concealed irritation. His eyes took in her worn clothing and makeshift jewelry display, and Madison could see the skepticism written across his features. She was accustomed to such reactions from adults who assumed that children, especially those from her neighborhood, couldn't possibly know anything useful. "Listen, little girl," Alexander said, his tone dismissive. "I'm sure you mean well, but this is an expensive vehicle that requires professional attention." Madison's jaw set with determination. She had heard similar words countless times, but she knew her skills were real. Her mother had taught her well, and she had spent countless hours helping neighbors with their car troubles in exchange for small payments or meals. "It's your battery connection," she said confidently. "I can hear it clicking when you try to start it." The terminal is probably loose or corroded. Takes about 2 minutes to fix if you have the right tools. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised by her technical knowledge. He glanced at his watch, noting that his important meeting was in less than an hour. The towing service had quoted him a 45-minute wait time, which would make him disastrously late. "And I suppose you have these right tools?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Madison nodded and reached into her small backpack, pulling out a compact tool set that had belonged to her mother. The tools were worn but well maintained, evidence of frequent use and careful attention. "My mum taught me," she said simply, moving toward the front of the Mercedes. She said knowing how to fix things was more valuable than owning fancy things. Alexander watched with growing amazement as Madison popped the hood with practiced ease and immediately identified the problem. Her small hands worked with surprising confidence, tightening the loose battery terminal and cleaning away the corrosion that had built up around the connections. "Try starting it now," she said, stepping back and wiping her hands on a cloth from her toolkit. Alexander slid into the driver's seat, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the girl's simple clothing. He turned the key and the engine roared to life immediately, purring with the smooth power that made the Mercedes brand famous. "Incredible," he murmured, stepping out of the car to face Madison. "Where did you learn to do that?" Madison's expression softened as she mentioned her mother. "Sarah Parker. She was really good with cars before she got sick. She taught me everything she could before." Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at her hands. Alexander noticed the sadness that crossed her features, recognizing the pain of loss in her young eyes. Something about her reminded him of someone from his past, though he couldn't quite place the memory. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Madison," she replied, looking up at him with curious eyes. "Madison Parker." The name sent a jolt through Alexander's memory, though he couldn't immediately understand why. He studied her face more carefully, noting the intelligence in her dark eyes and the determined set of her jaw. "Well, Madison Parker," he said, reaching for his wallet, "you've saved me a considerable amount of time and money. How much do I owe you?" Madison's eyes widened as she saw him pull out a $50 bill. It was more money than she typically earned in a week, and she could already imagine how pleased Dolores would be with such a contribution. "That's too much," she said, though her voice betrayed her need for the money. "The repair was really simple." Alexander smiled, impressed by her honesty. "Simple for you, maybe, but you solved a problem that would have cost me much more than $50 in lost time and towing fees." As Madison reached out to accept the money, Alexander's gaze fell upon her right hand. There, on her ring finger, was a delicate gold band with a small blue stone that caught the sunlight. The ring was clearly too large for her finger, held in place by a small piece of tape wrapped around the band. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. He knew that ring. He had designed it himself more than 12 years ago, commissioned from a specialty jeweler in Scottsdale. It was a unique piece, one of a kind, created for a very special woman who had disappeared from his life under mysterious circumstances. "Madison," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "where did you get that ring?" Madison looked down at her hand, touching the ring protectively. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed. She said it was from someone who cared about her very much, and that someday it might help me find my way to a better life." Alexander's heart pounded as memories flooded back. Sarah Mitchell, not Parker as Madison had said, had been the love of his life 12 years ago. They had met at a charity gala, and despite coming from different worlds, they had fallen deeply in love. He had given her that ring as a promise of their future together, but she had vanished one night without explanation, leaving only a note saying that she had to leave for reasons she couldn't explain. "What was your mother's full name?" Alexander asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Sarah Michelle Parker," Madison replied. "But she used to tell me stories about when she was younger and had a different name. She said she had to change it to keep us safe, but she never told me from what." Alexander's mind raced as he processed this information. Sarah Mitchell had become Sarah Parker. The woman he had loved and lost had been living in Phoenix all these years, and she had been raising his daughter. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and he had to steady himself against the car. "Madison," he said carefully, "did your mother ever mention anyone named Alexander?" Madison's eyes widened with recognition. "Alexander Westbrook. She talked about you sometimes, especially when she was really sick. She said you were a good man who deserved to know the truth, but that she had made choices to protect people she loved." The street around them seemed to fade away. As Alexander absorbed the magnitude of what he was learning, this remarkable young girl, who had just fixed his car with such skill and confidence, was his daughter. The child he had never known existed, raised by the woman he had never stopped loving. "Madison," he said softly, "I think we need to talk." The small cafe on Central Avenue buzzed with the usual lunch crowd, but Alexander's attention was completely focused on the young girl sitting across from him. Madison clutched a chocolate milkshake with both hands, her eyes darting between his face and the tabletop as she processed the incredible revelation that had just unfolded between them. "So you're saying," Madison said slowly, "that you're my father?" Alexander nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I believe so, Madison. The ring, your mother's stories about me, the timing, it all fits together. But I want you to know that I never knew about you. If I had known your mother was pregnant, I would never have let her face that alone." Madison studied his face intently, searching for signs of deception. Living with Dolores had taught her to be wary of adults who made promises they couldn't keep, but something in Alexander's eyes spoke of genuine sincerity and pain. "Why did she leave you?" Madison asked. "In her stories, she always made it sound like you two were happy together." Alexander's expression grew distant as he recalled those precious months 12 years ago. "We were happy. Happier than I had ever been in my life. But your mother received some kind of threat. She never told me exactly what, but it scared her enough to disappear overnight. I searched for her for years, hired private investigators, but she had covered her tracks completely. She was always scared," Madison said quietly. "Even when I was little, she would check the locks on our doors 3 times every night. Sometimes she would wake me up in the middle of the night, and we would move to a different apartment. She said it was because she wanted me to see different neighborhoods, but I knew she was frightened of something." Alexander felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. The thought of Sarah living in fear while raising their daughter alone filled him with a mixture of grief and anger. "Madison, where are you living now? Are you safe?" Madison's expression tightened, and she looked uncomfortable. "I live with Dolores Martinez. She took me in after Mom passed. She has a few other kids staying with her too. And she makes you work on the streets, selling jewelry." Alexander's voice carried a hint of concern that Madison immediately picked. "Oh, no, it's not so bad," Madison said quickly, though her eyes betrayed her true feelings. "Dolores gives us food and a place to sleep. We all contribute to help with expenses. It's fair." Alexander could hear the defensive tone in her voice, recognizing the way children often protected abusive situations because they feared the unknown. Alternatives. He had seen similar patterns in some of the youth programs his company had sponsored over the years. "Madison, I want you to know that you have choices now. You don't have to live in a situation that makes you uncomfortable or scared." Madison's eyes flashed with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Adults always say things like that, but they don't understand how complicated life really is. Dolores has papers that say she's my legal guardian. She filed them after Mom passed, and the state approved them because I didn't have any other family." Alexander felt his protective instincts surge stronger. The more he learned about Madison's situation, the more concerned he became. "What kind of papers? Did you see them yourself?" "Sort of," Madison said hesitantly. "Dolores showed them to me when some social worker came around asking questions, but I couldn't read all the legal words. I just know that the woman from the state said Dolores was officially responsible for me now." Alexander made a mental note to have his legal team investigate the guardianship arrangements. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him, especially given Madison's obvious intelligence and the suspicious circumstances surrounding her living conditions. "Tell me about your daily routine," Alexander said gently. What's a typical day like for you? Madison described her life with careful words, clearly having been coached about what to say to adults who ask too many questions. She talked about helping with household chores, contributing to family expenses through her jewelry sales, and attending school when possible. But Alexander could read between the lines, recognizing the signs of a child being exploited under the guise of care. Madison, when was the last time you went to school regularly? She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the blue ring. Mum was homeschooling me before she got really sick. After that, Dolores said the streets were better teachers than any classroom. She says I'm learning important life skills. Alexander's heart broke as he listened to his daughter describe a childhood that had been stolen from her. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he had been building a business empire, his own child had been struggling for basic necessities just across town. "Madison, I want to show you something," Alexander said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through his photos. He found what he was looking for and turned the screen toward her. "This is a picture of your mother and me, taken about 13 years ago." Madison's eyes widened as she stared at the image. It showed a younger Alexander, with his arm around a radiant young woman who looked remarkably like an older version of Madison herself. Sarah's smile was brilliant, her eyes sparkling with joy as she leaned into Alexander's embrace. "She looks so happy," Madison whispered, tracing her finger along the screen. "I remember her smiling like that sometimes, but not very often. Usually only when she was telling me stories about the past." "She was happy then," Alexander confirmed. "We both were. We had plans to get married, to start a family together. I wanted to give her everything she deserved: security, love, a future where she wouldn't have to worry about anything." "What happened to change that?" Madison asked, her voice barely audible. Alexander shook his head. "I wish I knew. She left me a note saying that she had to go away to protect the people she loved, but she never explained what the danger was or why she felt she had to face it alone." Madison was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too mature for her 11 years. "Mr. Westbrook," she said formally, "if you really are my father, what happens now?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities and complications. Alexander had been so focused on the miraculous discovery of his daughter that he hadn't fully considered the practical implications of their situation. "Now," he said carefully, "we figure out how to be a family. But first, I need to make sure you're safe and that your living situation is actually legal and appropriate." Madison's expression grew worried. "Dolores won't like it if I don't come home with money today. She's expecting at least $20, and with what you paid me, she'll want to know where I got so much." Alexander pulled out his business card and handed it to her. "Madison, I want you to call this number if you ever feel unsafe or if anyone tries to hurt you. Day or night, I'll answer." Madison stared at the elegant card with its embossed lettering. Alexander Westbrook, President and CEO, Westbrook Development Corporation. The address listed was in Scottsdale, one of Phoenix's most affluent areas. "You're really rich, aren't you?" she asked with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Alexander smiled sadly. "I've been financially successful, yes, but money doesn't mean much when you don't have the people you love to share it with. I would trade everything I own to have had the chance to know you and your mother all these years." Madison seemed to consider this, her young mind grappling with concepts of family, loyalty, and belonging that most children her age took for granted. "I need to go back now," she said reluctantly. "Dolores will be suspicious if I'm gone too long." Alexander wanted to protest, to insist that she come with him immediately to somewhere safe, but he recognized that rushing the situation could make things worse for Madison. He needed to be strategic about how he approached her rescue. "Before you go," he said, "I want you to have this." He pulled out another business card and wrote his personal cell phone number on the back. "This is my private number. You can call or text me anytime, about anything." I meant what I said. I'm here for you now. Madison tucked both cards carefully into her small backpack, next to her mother's tools. "Mr. Westbrook, Alexander, I'm glad I met you today, but I'm also scared about what might happen next." Change is always scary, Alexander acknowledged. But sometimes it's the only way to build something better. Your mother was brave enough to make difficult choices to protect you. Now it's my turn to be brave for both of you. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Alexander made one more request. Madison, would you be willing to meet me again tomorrow? Same time, same place? I'd like to learn more about your life, and there are some things about your mother that I'd like to share with you. Madison nodded, though her expression remained cautious. I'll try, but if Dolores gets suspicious or if something happens, I might not be able to come. Alexander's jaw tightened at the implication, but he kept his voice gentle. I understand, just remember, you're not alone anymore. Whatever happens, you have family now. As Madison walked away, clutching her small backpack and the $50 that would temporarily satisfy Dolores's demands, Alexander watched until she disappeared around a corner. Then he pulled out his phone and began making calls. It was time to learn everything he could about Dolores Martinez and the legal arrangements that gave her control over his daughter's life. The offices of Morrison, Sterling and Associates buzzed with quiet efficiency as Alexander paced behind the mahogany conference table, his usual composure replaced by barely contained urgency. 3 of Phoenix's most respected legal experts sat before him, along with private investigator Rebecca Chen, whose reputation for thoroughness had made her Alexander's first choice for sensitive matters. What did you find? Alexander asked, settling into his chair as Rebecca opened a thick manila folder. The guardianship paperwork appears legitimate on the surface, Rebecca began, her voice professional but tinged with concern. Dolores Martinez filed for emergency guardianship 6 months ago, citing that Madison Parker was an abandoned minor with no known relatives. However, there are several irregularities that raise red flags. Attorney David Morrison leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. The most concerning issue is that the search for living relatives was extremely superficial. Standard protocol requires extensive efforts to locate family members, but in this case, it appears only basic database searches were conducted. Additionally, Rebecca continued, I've discovered that Madison isn't the only child in Dolores's care. She currently has legal guardianship over 4 minors, all of whom were placed with her under similar circumstances. All 4 children contribute to household income through various street activities. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. Are you telling me this woman is systematically collecting vulnerable children and exploiting them? That's exactly what we're suggesting, said Sarah Williams, the family law specialist Alexander had brought onto the team. What's more troubling is that Dolores has connections within the Family Services Department. Her sister, Carmen Martinez, works as a case reviewer for Child Protective Services. Rebecca pulled out several photographs and documents. I spent the last 2 days observing the Martinez household and interviewing neighbors. The children are required to bring home specific amounts of money each day. Those who fall short face various punishments, including being locked in their rooms without meals. Alexander felt sick as he processed this information. While he had been living in luxury in Scottsdale, his daughter had been trapped in a system designed to exploit her intelligence and skills for someone else's profit. What are our legal options? Alexander asked. David Morrison consulted his notes. Given that you can prove paternity, you have grounds to challenge the guardianship. However, we'll need more than just DNA evidence. The court will want to see proof that you've been actively searching for Madison and that the original guardianship was obtained through fraudulent means. I can provide evidence of my search for Sarah over the years, Alexander said. I hired 3 different investigative firms between 2011 and 2018. I never stopped looking for her. Rebecca nodded approvingly. That helps establish your intent to be involved in any child's life, but we need to be careful about how we proceed. If Dolores suspects that her arrangement is being challenged, she might relocate Madison or take other steps to maintain control. What do you mean by other steps? Alexander's voice was sharp with concern. Children in these situations are often coached to lie to authorities, Sarah Williams explained. They're told that if they're removed from their current placement, they'll end up in worse situations. Some are even convinced that their guardian is protecting them from dangers they don't understand. Alexander thought about Madison's defensive responses when he had asked about her living situation. The way she had quickly justified Dolores's demands and minimized the hardships she faced was consistent with a child who had been manipulated into accepting exploitation as normal. "There's something else," Rebecca said, pulling out another document. "I found records indicating that Sarah Parker, Madison's mother, attempted to file a restraining order against Dolores Martinez just 2 months before her passing. The application was never completed, but the preliminary paperwork suggests that Sarah was concerned about Dolores's intentions regarding Madison." Alexander's pulse quickened. What kind of concerns? According to the incomplete filing, Sarah believed that Dolores was positioning herself to gain custody of Madison in the event of Sarah's passing. Sarah had apparently discovered that Dolores had been asking neighbors questions about Madison's abilities and potential earning capacity. The pieces of a disturbing puzzle were falling into place. Alexander realized that Madison's current situation wasn't just a case of a well-meaning woman taking in an orphan child. It was a calculated plan to acquire a valuable asset. "I need to get Madison out of there immediately," Alexander said, rising from his chair. "Wait," David Morrison said firmly. "If you act precipitously, you could jeopardize any legal case we might build. We need to file the proper motions and present compelling evidence to the court. A judge won't simply transfer custody based on emotional appeals. But every day she stays there, she's being exploited," Alexander protested. "Which is why we need to work quickly but carefully," Sarah Williams interjected. "I recommend that we file for emergency custody based on suspected child exploitation, while simultaneously challenging the original guardianship on grounds of fraud and procedural violations." Rebecca consulted her notes. "I can continue surveillance and document the daily exploitation patterns. If we can show that Madison is being forced to work under conditions that violate child labor laws, that strengthens our case significantly." "What about Madison herself?" Alexander asked. "Should I tell her what we're planning?" The legal team exchanged glances before David Morrison responded. "That's delicate. On one hand, Madison might be able to provide testimony about her treatment. On the other hand, children in these situations often feel conflicted loyalties and might inadvertently alert their guardians to legal challenges." Alexander thought about his brief conversation with Madison the previous day. Despite the difficult circumstances, she had shown remarkable intelligence and strength. He believed she deserved to know that adults were working to protect her interests. "I think Madison is mature enough to handle the truth," he said finally. "She's already suspicious about her situation, and she's smart enough to be discreet if we explain the importance of confidentiality." Rebecca nodded. "I agree. Children who understand what's happening are often better witnesses and more cooperative throughout the legal process, but we should prepare her carefully and make sure she knows how to stay safe while we build our case." Sarah Williams pulled out a calendar. "If we file the emergency custody petition today, we could have a hearing as early as next week, but we'll need substantial evidence of immediate danger to Madison's welfare to justify emergency intervention." "I can provide that evidence," Rebecca said confidently. "Based on what I've observed, there are clear violations of child welfare standards occurring daily in that household." Alexander felt a mixture of hope and anxiety as the legal strategy took shape. The process would be complex and potentially lengthy, but at least now he had experienced professionals working to reunite him with his daughter. "There's one more thing we should discuss," David Morrison said carefully. "Once we file these petitions, Dolores Martinez and her legal representation will likely investigate your background extensively. They'll look for any reason to argue that you're not a suitable guardian." Alexander straightened his shoulders. "My record is clean. I've built a successful business, I'm financially stable, and I've never been involved in any questionable activities." "Good," Sarah Williams said, "but be prepared for them to argue that you're a stranger to Madison, that removing her from her current placement would be traumatic, and that your sudden appearance in her life is suspicious." "How do we counter those arguments?" Alexander asked. By demonstrating that you've been actively searching for Sarah and that you would have been involved in Madison's life from the beginning if you had known about her existence, Rebecca explained. We also need to show that Madison's current placement is harmful to her development and well-being. Alexander nodded, understanding the challenges ahead. What's our timeline? David Morrison consulted his calendar. We can file the initial petitions by tomorrow morning. Discovery and evidence gathering will take approximately 2 weeks. The emergency custody hearing should occur within 10 days of filing, with a full custody hearing scheduled 4 to 6 weeks later. And during that time, Madison stays with Dolores. Unfortunately, yes, unless we can prove immediate physical danger. But we'll request supervised visitation rights for you, which would allow you to spend time with Madison while the case is pending. As the meeting concluded, Alexander felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the legal system that stood between him and his daughter. But he also felt grateful to have such a capable team working on Madison's behalf. One final question, he said, as the attorneys began packing their materials. What are the realistic chances of success? Rebecca and the legal team exchanged confident looks before David Morrison responded. Given the evidence, we've uncovered about fraudulent guardianship proceedings and ongoing child exploitation. I'd estimate our chances at better than 70%. The key will be presenting Madison's testimony effectively and demonstrating that placement with you serves her best interests. As Alexander left the law offices that afternoon, he carried with him both hope and determination. The legal battle ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since discovering Madison's existence, he had a concrete plan to bring his daughter home where she belonged. The Maricopa County Family Court was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning as Alexander adjusted his tie nervously, watching the clock above Judge Patricia Harrison's bench tick toward 9 o'clock. 3 weeks had passed since he first met Madison, and the legal battle for his daughter's custody had consumed every moment of his life since then. Madison sat beside him at the plaintiff's table, her small hand occasionally reaching out to touch his arm for reassurance. She wore a simple blue dress that Alexander had purchased for her during one of their supervised visits, and her hair was neatly braided. Despite her young age, she had insisted on testifying about her experiences with Dolores Martinez. Across the courtroom, Dolores sat with her attorney, her expression a mask of righteous indignation. She had spent weeks portraying herself as Madison's devoted guardian, claiming that Alexander was an opportunistic stranger, trying to disrupt a stable home environment. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who had seen countless family disputes, her gray hair pulled back severely and her expression professionally neutral. At 58, she had a reputation for fairness, but also for not tolerating any attempts to deceive her court. This emergency custody hearing will now come to order, Judge Harrison announced. We are here to determine the custody arrangements for Madison Parker, currently 11 years old. Mr. Morrison, you may present your opening statement. David Morrison rose confidently, his silver hair catching the courtroom lights. Your Honor, this case represents a fundamental violation of a child's rights and a father's parental rights. The evidence will show that Ms. Martinez obtained guardianship through fraudulent means, exploiting procedural gaps, while the child's biological father searched desperately for his daughter and her mother. Morrison gestured toward the evidence table, where documents and photographs were neatly arranged. We will demonstrate that Madison Parker has been subjected to systematic exploitation, forced to work on the streets to generate income for Ms. Martinez's household, while being denied adequate education and normal childhood experiences. Dolores's attorney, Marcus Webb, stood for his opening statement. Your Honor, my client has provided a stable, loving home for Madison Parker during the most difficult period of her young life. Ms. Martinez stepped forward when no one else would, taking responsibility for a child who had been abandoned by the system and by absent relatives who showed no interest in her welfare until now. Webb's voice carried practiced emotion as he continued. Mr. Westbrook's sudden appearance, claiming to be Madison's father, comes only after learning of her valuable mechanical skills. This appears to be an attempt to exploit the child's abilities for his own benefit, under the guise of parental concern. Judge Harrison nodded to both attorneys, then looked at the evidence before her. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings. Mr. Morrison, please call your first witness." The plaintiff calls Rebecca Chen, licensed private investigator. Rebecca approached the witness stand with professional composure, carrying a thick folder of documentation. After being sworn in, she began her testimony with methodical precision. "Your Honor, my investigation revealed systematic irregularities in the guardianship process. Standard searches for living relatives were not conducted despite Mr. Westbrook's extensive public profile as a Phoenix businessman. A simple internet search would have revealed his identity and contact information." Rebecca presented photographs and written observations. "I documented Madison's daily routine over a 2-week period. She works 6 days per week, 8 to 10 hours per day, selling handmade jewelry on street corners. All earnings are surrendered to Miss Martinez with harsh punishments for failing to meet daily quotas." "What kind of punishments?" Judge Harrison asked. "Denial of meals, confinement to her room, and verbal abuse designed to make her feel worthless if she doesn't generate sufficient revenue." Webby objected. "Hearsay, Your Honor. The witness cannot testify to conversations she didn't personally observe." "Sustained," Judge Harrison ruled. "Ms. Chen, please limit your testimony to your direct observations." Rebecca nodded and continued. "I personally observed Madison being berated for bringing home only $15 on a day when the quota was $20. She was sent to her room without dinner and forbidden to use the bathroom for 3 hours." The courtroom was silent as Rebecca detailed her findings. Madison sat quietly beside Alexander, occasionally squeezing his hand when the testimony became particularly difficult to hear. "Mr. Morrison, call your next witness." The plaintiff calls Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, child psychologist. Dr. Rodriguez had evaluated Madison during the previous week, and her testimony provided professional context for Madison's situation. Madison exhibits classic signs of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse. She has been conditioned to believe that her worth is measured only by her economic productivity. However, Dr. Rodriguez continued, Madison also demonstrates remarkable resilience and intelligence. With proper support and a stable home environment, she has excellent potential for recovery and normal development. Webb cross-examined aggressively. "Dr. Rodriguez, isn't it true that removing Madison from her current home could cause additional trauma?" "Any transition involves adjustment challenges," Dr. Rodriguez acknowledged. "However, remaining in an exploitative environment causes ongoing psychological damage that far outweighs temporary adjustment difficulties." Judge Harrison made notes as the testimony continued. "Mr. Morrison, please call your final witness." The plaintiff calls Madison Parker. Madison walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity, her small frame dwarfed by the formal courtroom setting. After being sworn in with age-appropriate language, she sat straight and looked directly at Judge Harrison. "Madison," Morrison began gently, "can you tell the court about a typical day in your current home?" Madison's voice was clear and steady as she described her routine. "I wake up at 6 in the morning and help prepare breakfast for everyone. Then I gather my jewelry supplies and go to my assigned corner downtown. I have to stay there until I earn at least $20, sometimes until after dark." "What happens if you don't earn $20? "Dolores gets angry. She says I'm lazy and worthless. Sometimes she doesn't let me eat dinner, and I have to sleep on the floor instead of in my bed." Judge Harrison leaned forward. "Madison, do you go to school?" "Not regular school. Dolores says the streets teach me more important lessons than any classroom, but I miss learning about science and math and reading books." Morrison continued his questioning. "Madison, Mr. Westbrook claims to be your father. How do you feel about that?" Madison glanced at Alexander, her expression softening. "At first I was scared because I didn't know if he was telling the truth, but he knew things about my mom that only someone who really loved her would know. And he treats me like I'm important, not just because of what I can do, but because of who I am." "Have you had a chance to spend time with Mr. Westbrook?" "Yes, during the supervised visits. He takes me to places I've never been, like the library and the science museum. He answers all my questions and never makes me feel stupid for asking them. He says I'm smart and that I deserve to have dreams about my future. Webb's cross-examination was brief, but pointed. Madison, Ms. Martinez has taken care of you for 6 months. Don't you feel grateful for that care? Madison considered the question carefully. I'm grateful that she gave me a place to live when I had nowhere else to go, but I don't think taking care of someone means making them work all the time and never letting them be a kid. Judge Harrison asked her own questions. Madison, if you could choose where to live, what would you want? Madison's response was immediate and heartfelt. I want to live with my father. I want to go to school and learn about the world. I want to have time to be a kid and maybe even make friends. I've never had a real friend because I'm always working. After Madison's testimony, Webb called Dolores to the stand. Her testimony painted a picture of selfless dedication to unwanted children, but under Morrison's cross-examination, inconsistencies emerged. Ms. Martinez, how much money do the children in your care typically earn per month? I don't keep track of specific amounts, Dolores replied evasively. Morrison presented bank records that Rebecca had subpoenaed. These deposits show consistent monthly amounts totaling over $4,000 from the 4 children's earnings. Yet your household expenses, including rent, utilities, and food, total less than $2,000 per month. Where does the surplus money go? Dolores's attorney objected repeatedly, but the financial evidence painted a clear picture of exploitation. Judge Harrison called for a brief recess before delivering her decision. Alexander and Madison sat together in the hallway, both nervous about the outcome. Whatever happens, Alexander told his daughter, I want you to know that I will never stop fighting for you. You deserve so much more than you've been given. Madison leaned against his shoulder. I believe you, Dad. For the first time in my life, I feel like someone actually wants me, not just what I can do for them. When court reconvened, Judge Harrison delivered her ruling with characteristic directness. This case presents clear evidence of systematic child exploitation disguised as guardianship. Ms. Martinez obtained custody through procedural shortcuts that violated the child's right to be placed with available family members. She looked directly at Madison. More importantly, this child has been denied the fundamental right to childhood education and emotional security. Her labor has been exploited for adult financial gain, which constitutes a form of trafficking. Judge Harrison's voice grew firm. I hereby terminate the guardianship arrangement between Ms. Martinez and Madison Parker, effective immediately. Custody is awarded to Alexander Westbrook, with all appropriate background checks and home studies to be completed within 30 days. Madison gasped with joy and threw her arms around Alexander, who held her tightly as tears streamed down his face. Across the courtroom, Dolores sat in stunned silence as her attorney whispered about possible appeals. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, I am ordering a full investigation into Ms. Martinez's other guardianship arrangements. This court will not tolerate the exploitation of vulnerable children under the guise of providing care. As they left the courthouse, Alexander carried Madison's small suitcase, containing everything she owned in the world. The weight of it broke his heart, but he was determined that this would be the last time his daughter would have to carry her entire life in a single bag. Where are we going now? Madison asked as they reached his car. Home, Alexander replied simply. We're going home. The house in Scottsdale was everything Madison had never dared to dream of. Alexander had spent the previous weeks preparing a bedroom for her, complete, with bookshelves, a desk for homework, and art supplies for the mechanical projects she loved. But more importantly, he had prepared his heart to be the father she deserved. 6 months later, Madison stood in the auditorium of Phoenix Preparatory Academy, accepting an award for academic excellence. She had not only caught up to her grade level, but had excelled beyond it, particularly in mathematics and science. Alexander watched from the audience, his chest swelling with pride. After the ceremony, they drove to the offices of the Sarah Parker Foundation, which Alexander had established in memory of Madison's mother. The foundation provided support for children in exploitative situations and helped single mothers in crisis. "Mom would be so proud of what we're doing," Madison said as they toured the facility that bore her mother's name. "She would be proud." "Of you," Alexander corrected. "You've turned your pain into purpose, and that's the most powerful thing anyone can do." Madison smiled and adjusted the blue ring on her finger, now properly sized and worn with pride rather than desperation. "I think she knew somehow that you would find me. That's why she gave me this ring and told me stories about you. She was preparing me to recognize you when the time came." As they drove home that evening, Madison working on homework in the passenger seat while Alexander navigated the familiar streets of their neighborhood, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed. The successful businessman who had thought he had everything had discovered that he had been missing the most important thing of all: family. "Dad," Madison said, looking up from her math homework, "I have a presentation next week about heroes. Can I talk about you?" Alexander's throat tightened with emotion. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just a father who loves his daughter." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Madison replied, with the wisdom of someone who had learned early. That love was the most powerful force in the world. As they pulled into their driveway, past the garden where Madison had learned to grow her own flowers, and the workshop where she continued to develop her mechanical skills, now as a hobby rather than survival necessity, Alexander reflected on the miracle that had brought them together. Sometimes the most important encounters happen when we least expect them. A broken-down car, a skilled young mechanic, and a ring that carried the memory of lost love had somehow woven together to create something beautiful and lasting. A family reunited, a childhood restored, and a future filled with infinite possibilities. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Madison and Alexander's story has touched your hearts and reminded you of the transformative power of love and determination. Like Madison, many children around the world are searching for their place in families that will cherish them, not for what they can do, but for who they are. If this story moved you, we invite you to explore our special playlist of equally captivating family stories that celebrate the unbreakable bonds between parents and children. You can find it by clicking the link to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you new stories every day that explore the beautiful complexity of human relationships and the courage it takes to build the families we deserve. We'd love to hear your thoughts about Madison and Alexander's journey in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed the direction of your life? Share your stories with our community. We read every comment and treasure the connections we build through these shared experiences. Until next time, remember that every day holds the possibility of miracles, and sometimes the family we've been searching for